this. It's gory, but it's not gratuitously gory. It's gory because it's a fucking zombie story with fucking terrorists. Mira Grant herself was concerned about there being sex and shit in it. I honestly cannot remember anything that could be. There's mention of sex, but there's less mention of sex than there would be in a PG-13 story. Like, I'm not putting that down because I prefer our stories, and that sounds almost like a negative statement from me, but it's not necessary. It's the two main characters. Well, the two main characters are brother and sister. And honestly, if it was any more risque in the sex department, it would bring it down for me, because it just toes the line perfectly to where you can believe that there's no incest, but at the same time, they're not going around dating and shit. They don't come straight out and say either of them is a virgin, but you could believe it. You could also believe that Sean has dated, and that is just not a major concern for him. You know, they're living in a world where survival is the main concern. And when you're worried about surviving every day of your life, you're not as concerned about procreating or about recreational sex as a lot of people might be. Buffy is the third person along with them. She's a little easier on the survival because she writes fiction. She does the shit that I do. Although I'm sure if I was with them, I would not be doing that shit, because I would be out there every day. I like nature, if you can call zombies nature. But she's doing the fiction blogging, she's writing the stories. She would be the one reviewing. If she lived in a world of angry video game nerd, nostalgia critic, cinema snob, Spoonie experiment, and all that shit atop the fourth wall, if she lived in that world, she would be doing reviews. That's her position. She's called a fictional. There's different types of bloggers. Again, I don't want to tell you all this shit because I want you to read the book, but it's very in-depth. One thing I will tell you about the types of bloggers, even though, yeah, I know I'm hiding shit from you from the first fucking chapter, but screw you. Read the fucking book if you want to hear about it. But there's some very obvious pop culture shit. I think I mentioned Buffy's name. Buffy is a pop culture reference that not all the characters get, because this is shit 50 years after the Buffy show. So there's that. There's also homages to where figures that are high profile, they're not quite legends here, but they're getting there. Well, this is a world where the average Joe, the blogger, you know, average Joe blogger who goes on the internet and talks about their idols and all that, has become the mainstream. So these characters have been put as legends. Some of them you have to keep a close eye on. A very well-known figure that reports news in a comical way. The types of people who report news in a comical way are named after that person. Type of people who go out and chase zombies, they're named after somebody who did certain things like that with other wildlife in our world. There's connections like that. They're not outright stated. They don't come out straight out and say this group of people is named after this celebrity. That's something for the reader to figure out, and that's something where I could see the novel losing steam in about 10-20 years because of that, to the point where only older people get those references and love them, and other people do not get the references. But the story does not rely on it. It's such a strong story. It's a suspenseful story, but at the same time it's interesting. I made reference to Stephen King. Grant uses a slightly modified version of one of Stephen King's techniques. King likes to take excerpts of songs, movies, articles, and put them in between the chapters in his book. This helps bring out the suspense. It helps give you an idea what's coming without spoiling anything. Sometimes he will take something like the diary of a character and put that in the chapter. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but more of a teaser. What Mira Grant does here is she takes blogs, some of them by the actual characters, some of them about the characters, some of them completely unrelated to the characters, some of them about the zombie apocalypse itself, and puts them in there. Some of them are related to chapter by chapter, and some of them are things that were hinted at to give you background story, to flesh out the world. And with all these blogs, it creates something like, I gotta bring in the Star Wars reference again, because part of the thing with Star Wars is that the world was so fleshed out, so intricate, that it became a real world, that it was fleshed out to where you do not see it as a fictional world. It goes beyond suspension of disbelief because it brings you so strongly into it. It has its own history. It has its own reality. There are ways you learn to expect people to behave, even ones that are different from your own world. Like I mentioned, the paranoia you get so expecting of it that if someone acted not, that they didn't expect a zombie to be around every corner, you start to wonder what the fuck's up going on with this character. And on top of that, it's our own world, so we already know 2,000 years worth of history. So that's a benefit toward creating the world, to where it's not like Star Wars where we need the Force, we need the various religions, we need to explain why the Empire is so powerful. In Feed, we already have Buffy's a Catholic. Perfect example, probably the best example, possibly the only example, but I doubt it in terms of religion anyway. And there are plenty of examples on other things. But like I said, Buffy's a Catholic, so there's a set of expected beliefs, an archetype, stereotypes that can come with that. There are references to blondes, so on and so forth. So between the new things created by Mira Grant and between the existing things from our own world, the world is just so fleshed out to where you might as well be reading a non-fiction biography. Except that a non-fiction biography is very rarely as story-oriented, because, well, the story follows, it almost entirely follows the main character, Georgia. She does the news. She'll go out. She'll go out into the zombies, but she won't report. She won't provoke them herself. That's her brother Sean's job. They're a very interesting story because they come from a family of bloggers. It's very tied in with Kellis Amberley. The history of the virus that causes the zombies. Very, very much involved. Her family is historical. They're the first case of an animal to human transmission, I believe. But their parents are bloggers. There's an interesting family thing, and then because of that, there's a very strong bond between them. Very, very well characterized, to the point where you know what these characters are going to do. They have their moral systems, they have their disagreements, they have their little quirks, they have their logic, they have their irrational things. They're people. They're probably more of a person to someone reading than someone who knows me from my reviews, sitting here listening to my reviews. You know these people as people. That's, again, another reason why I'm forced to make the Stephen King reference, because they both go so deep into these people's heads. You see them as people, you do not see them as characters. There's one or two people that you'll see as a character. Another presidential candidate that's only name dropped. I don't think we actually see her. You'll think of that. You might think of her as a character. But when it comes to Sean, Buffy, George, Ryman, Tate, even all these people, you're so intimately aware of them as a person. You can't see them as a character. Well, unless you're an extreme cynic, or if you're a critic. Someone like me, I can look at this as, well, it's an extremely well developed character. But if you're in the middle of reading it, this is one of those books where I couldn't even consider taking notes. I just ate the book, and what's left is what I remember. And again, since I don't want to give you every detail about the book, I don't mind that. If I was doing a more angry review, I'd have had to read the book again. As for the characters themselves, I keep starting to go off on them, but I keep going on to something else. To give you an example of how well developed these characters are, you have George. She's cold. She's not your Boba Fett cold. Your Darth Vader. She's cold by necessity. She reports the news, and she just to survive day to day. She has issues with how she feels about her parents. She doesn't date, although there's nothing. She's not against dating per se. She has no interest in it. She has a disease which is related to the zombie infestation, retinal Kellis Amberley. So she wears sunglasses all the time. This is what makes her more badass, and it also gives something about her character. So anybody who has a recurring medical condition, anybody who has a limp, anybody who wears glasses, anybody